Hi guys, it's Penelope in London, and this is about Jupiter the move it made into Leo a couple of days ago, actually the June the 30th at I think it was 6:52 British Summer Time. So it would have been 29th in California because it's 8 hours behind. So just so you know, and this is a 12-year cycle. So what we're looking at, let's find Jupiter. Can you see my marker there? Some people I think listen without looking at the screen, and that's absolutely fine. So, but if you like to look and learn, then you can do that too. And you see Jupiter's here at 0 degrees 59. So if I go back by days, go here, we're going to go 4th of July. Happy 4th of July to people out there in America. So I'm in London, so we don't celebrate it here. But it's very interesting because it is 250 years. And I think maybe midweek next week, I will look at the chart of the USA. That will be quite interesting. I have done it before years ago. So 1st of July, and we got the so we've got the 29th, and it was in Cancer, sorry, 29 degrees. And then on the 30th, I'm not going to do the exact moment because I'll have to start messing around with the time up there. So if we start with this, and we know it was June the 30th or the 29th in the USA, and it deserves to be said that before we go anywhere else, it's a calendar day that was carrying so much astrological weight. So British summertime, that would have been 6 a.m., 7 a.m. in the morning in the UK. And the full moon at that time was at 7 degrees. So actually, let's go back by the hours. So we're going to go back, and we've got it at around 6:44. It's 11 degrees. It's there. It's not 7 degrees. That's the 29th, though. I'm messing around now. Anyway, the moon at that time was in Capricorn, which we have been looking at in the last video that I did. And also, Mercury became its station and went retrograde at 26 degrees. And there was a full moon and Jupiter ingress and a Mercury station all in within 24 hours. So it was really full on. And that's an enormous amount of energy and movement. And it was happening in a very short window. So I think it would be worth pausing to understand before we get to that Jupiter in Leo what it actually means. And also, before I go any further, if anything I share resonates with you and you'd like to get in contact with me to look at your own natal chart, then in the description, you'll see a booking link. And I do work with people individually. I also do hypnosis and astrology, and I do peer support work for London a trauma clinic in London. So I understand quite a bit about CPTSD trauma. So I can speak about these things. I'm not qualified as a therapist, but I can speak about many of these things and understanding the depth of things. So now let's look at the mythology of Jupiter. So Jupiter, Zeus in the Greek tradition, is the king of gods, and he was the youngest son of Kronos and Rhea. That's spelled Rhea. And his story begins with a rescue. So he was Kronos, having been warned that one of his children would be overthrow him, swallowed each of his offspring at birth. There's a wonderful painting, and I can't recall who it's by, but it's a wonderful painting of what I understand as being Saturn. Or when I looked at it, I thought it was Saturn, like eating the children. But it says here that Kronos, I believe, is to do with Saturn. But don't take my word on that because I haven't researched that enough. And he swallowed each of his offspring at birth. And Rhea, determined to save at least one child, hid infant Zeus under and gave Kronos a stone wrapped in swaddling clothes to swallow in place of what he thought was he was eating his children. So Zeus was raised in secret on Crete. I've been to Crete actually. It's very beautiful. I've been there a couple of times. Very beautiful place. So So he was raised in secret on Crete, nursed and protected until he was strong enough to return and challenge his father. And he freed his swallowed siblings, led the revolt against the Titans, and became the ruler of Olympus. And not through inheritance, but through a war he had to win. So this origin matters. Jupiter's expansiveness is not naive, so it's not a naive expansiveness. It is the expansiveness of somebody who was nearly destroyed before he had a chance to live as a baby, and who has protected long enough to grow, who sorry was protected long enough to grow into his power, and who then had to fight to claim the position that was rightfully his. So Zeus becomes, after that victory, the god of the sky, of justice, of hospitality, of the protection of guests and strangers, of the oath and the law that holds civilization together at the largest scale. So this is Jupiter, the law and civilization and our belief systems. And he is generous because he understands somewhere in his own history what it is, needing to be rescued. He also is the god most associated with excess, so with appetite, with overreach, and with the abuses of power that come when expansiveness is not tempered by wisdom. So we can see this as we go through our own lives. Like when we're younger, we may drink more, we may party, and then through wisdom, we realize that we can't do all of that. And then, the same with spending money. We get to a point where we realize that, to be excessive is pretty pointless. And in fact, I've noticed recently when I've had a mobile phone, an iPhone, as many of us have got, not all of us, but I realized I haven't replaced it for like 3.5 years. And I thought, I don't want a new one. And one of the reasons I don't particularly want a new one is there's nothing wrong with this one. And it just had a new battery put in it by Apple because I have Apple Care. So it didn't cost anything for a new battery. And the other thing is that I'm aware of the children, in certain countries who have to dig the grounds for the cobalt and the parts that go into the phones. So there's an awareness that, hang on, it's not something I need. But when we're younger, for a lot of us, we want the newest, shiniest thing. But we realize that the newest, shiniest thing at some point is going to get old, and the thrill of having something new and shiny becomes a bit boring after a while. So that is excess. And then he is also generous because he understands somewhere in his own history. This is the part where, what it is to need to be rescued. He is also the god most associated with excess. This is where we're at with appetite, with overreach, and with the abuses of power that come when expansiveness is not tempered by wisdom. So we come back to the wisdom. Jupiter's myths are full of both his magnanimity and his transgressions. He is the principle of growth, and also in its full complexity, not simply good fortune, but the whole question of what we do when we have more power, more reach, more possibility than we strictly need. Because we don't need unlimited power, we don't need unlimited resources, we don't need unlimited anything, even life, really. At some point when we get into our later years, it's that idea, who wants to live forever? It's like the body gets tired. I'm going to sound old now, but we have our aches and pains. And, it's just we're on this soul journey, this life journey. So the 12-year cycle, Jupiter takes approximately 12 years to complete its orbit of the sun, spending about 1 year in each sign. And this means Jupiter's full cycle maps almost precisely onto the 12 signs, which is interesting, giving us a complete Jupiter return every 12 years. A moment when Jupiter comes home to wherever it is in our birth chart. So for me, it's at the cusp of my going into my 8th house. So it's almost in my 8th house. And it's at 3 degrees of Cancer. That's where my Jupiter is. So look where your Jupiter is in your chart as well to see when you have your Jupiter return. So it's a moment when Jupiter comes home to wherever it was at our birth and offers a renewal of faith, growth, opportunity in that particular house of the chart. So Jupiter, here it is. I'm going to move it back to 00 degrees there. Jupiter last moved through Leo between roughly July 2014 and August 2015. If you can remember anything about what was expanding in your life during that window, the creative projects, where they, what were you beginning with, what confidence was built. So if let's take this back to 2015, because we're in July, so it would have still been there in August. So we got Jupiter, that's 2015, and Jupiter is in Leo. So the 30th of June 2015, it was at 21 degrees of Leo. So now we're going to come back to 2026, 30th of June, it's in Leo. So what was going on for you around, if you look back? I remember what was going on for me. Firstly, I got a ticket to go to Miami. It's quite comical, the story now looking back. I got a ticket to go to Miami, and I was on an expansive journey, and it was a little bit nuts because actually at the time for me, Saturn transit was in my 12th house on my Neptune. So I was probably losing the plot a little bit. I was probably in excess, but I had been at that point, I'd been 2 years without drinking alcohol because I stopped on July the 2nd, 2012, because I used to drink on childhood trauma and memories, and I found drinking to alleviate some of that for me at the time. But on this 2nd of July, July 2nd, 2026, I'm 14 years free of alcohol, which is bloody brilliant. And I have no desire to, that anymore, or I just couldn't be bothered. I like my focus and my clarity is wonderful. So what else, if there's anything you can remember about what was expanding in your life during that window, what creative projects were beginning, think about it. That gives a sense of the territory Jupiter is now revisiting. So 12 years is long enough for an entire chapter of life to unfold. 12 years is a long time. It goes very quickly, but it is a long time. So whatever Leo themes were active then are being offered a renewed cycle now. And Jupiter in Leo, the collective meaning, if this may help for some people. So we have the personal to us. And then also when we look at our own charts, we're looking at how Jupiter touches in with our own planets, with our other planets, which is very different to where some astrologers will say if you have Jupiter in this house or you have Jupiter in this house, that it gets simplified. But this is not how it works. Jupiter is there's far more depth going on there to the connections with our own planets. There could be hard aspects, or there could be softer aspects, or there could be trines which can make us a bit lazy or bring something easily coming to us, flowing like a gift, not gifts, but it's just an easier run. And also when there are squares, like at the moment, my Neptune transit is square to my Jupiter. So I've got to watch out for that sort of like excess and idea with running away, with the Neptunian ideas of, things should be easy, and I just want that. It's like there's a bit of work for me to do. And then we look at the houses they're in, that gives them more definition. So where Cancer, when it's in Cancer, when Jupiter's just left Cancer, and it's about the private emotional world and the family of origin. And what's interesting, that we think that Mercury has just gone retrograde in Cancer at this point. You see here, if you look at that 30th of June, you've got a station there. And if you go hours ahead, so watch the station here, and you can see that S will change to an RX. There you go. On the 30th of June, it went retrograde in the sign of Cancer as Jupiter's leaving Cancer into Leo. So where Cancer with Jupiter leaving is about the private emotional world and the family of origin. Leo is about the self stepping into visibility. It is the sign of performance in its truest sense. And it's not, artif artifice, but the willingness to be seen fully, to take up space, to let what is most alive in us be witnessed by others. And Jupiter in Leo is, its expansion in the territory of authentic self expression. And I have noticed that with myself this week. I have noticed there's something more authentic self expression in even towards myself and being out there in the world when I've been out and about. It is the faith in our own creative voice, and it is the generosity of spirit, warmth, and a kind of, magnanimous confidence that wants to celebrate rather than withhold. So rather than withholding, we want to celebrate. And at a collective level, Jupiter in Leo tends to coincide with the flourishing of creative cultural expression. We got the arts, performance, leadership that inspires through charisma and genuine warmth rather than through control. Because we've had so much control over the last year since that Pluto Capricorn, and then we had Pluto leave Capricorn, and then it moved into Aquarius, which is the collective dream. Aquarius isn't just that, but it's where we're observing, but we're also, it's the 11th house Aquarius, generally speaking. So it's more to do with the collective dream and ideas, hopes as well. So the shadow of this transit is really worth looking at because Leo's gifts can tip into excess, and that's what we want to look out for. There can be the inflation of the ego into a hunger for recognition that loses sight of genuine creative substance. So we don't want to just, be one-hit wonders. If we do something that we feel is really our thing, and then we can not lose sight of our genuine creative substance. Something like if we're going to leave things behind, a legacy, it's like not just, we don't want to just be fluff, and just like nothingness. It's to make something beautiful, to be creative. So Jupiter amplifies whatever it touches, which is got to be taken on board. And Leo, amplified without humanity, can become a spectacle of its own sake. So because Leo is opposite Pluto, and we've got this, Leo is opposite Aquarius. Sorry. Leo is opposite Aquarius. And what we have is that in the coming weeks, it's going to be in a complete opposition. It's going to be in an opposition with Pluto, which we'll talk about more as well at another time. But this is worth taking into account that that's going to take place, Jupiter opposing Pluto. So the invitation, if we look at that these planets are inviting something in, or we want to invite something in, at its best is a kind of self-expression that is generous rather than, self-promoting. So it's not just about self-promotion. It's like, what creative things can we do together? The creativity that gives something real to others rather than simply demanding to be admired. And when I look around, a lot of there's a lot around where people just want to be. I think with reels, maybe they're just too short for me. I prefer long form content because these little hits of, see me, see me, but these wonderful, that people are doing wonderful work, and often that takes for us to really truly see the wonderful work. It's long form content generally. If we think about a movie or a piece of music, these things rarely just come out within like a couple of hours. There are things that people work on for years, like movies. It may be in the making for over 5 years, 10 years. Somebody may have written a book, then it gets turned into a script, and then there's work behind it, which then becomes the legacy of people as well. So the invitation is the expression to be generous rather than just self-promoting. So take that in mind. Whatever you're doing, it's not that you're just promoting yourself and it's all about, well, I want to be promoted. It's like, how are we working together? And this is going through my eighth house. So for me, that Jupiter is going to be It's in my eighth house. I have an intercepted house, which is many of us do have actually. Unless you use whole house, I prefer to use on my chart. I use porphyry, which I like, and I enjoy using that. And I think that for me, everybody's chart's not going to work the same way. Everybody's chart's different, but it just illustrates how a transit like this lands differently depending on where it falls for each of us individually. For me, both Cancer and Leo are intercepted in my eighth house, and that means Jupiter has been moving through my eighth house in Cancer for the past year anyway. And as it crosses into Leo at 0 degrees, it remains in my, it's still in my eighth house, and it's going to be there until it gets to 12, I think it's 12 degrees, and then it will move into my ninth house. So simply moving from Cancer interception into Leo interception, but it's within the same house. So the eighth house is the house of depth, DEPTH, just in case you didn't get what I said. Depth of what is shared rather than what is solely owned, and of transformation of what lies beneath the surface of ordinary life. And it is death, which is not depth. I hope I'm not confusing you with my pronunciation here, but and rebirth and the unconscious, the underworld. Jupiter moving through this house over the past year in Cancer has been about expansion and faith found through emotional depth, the emotional deep stuff within us, through ancestral and family material, through the work of going down into what was hidden rather than staying at the surface. And as Jupiter now shifts into Leo, portion of that same intercepted house, something changes in tone, even though the territory still remains in the eighth house. Leo brings warmth, creativity, and a quality of radiance into the underworld work. And there is something in this transit for me about the depth work beginning to find its creativity for joyful expression, about the eighth house material starting to want to be given in form, to be shone upon, rather than just simply processed in private. Because in Cancer, it's more of a private undertaking in the eighth house. In Leo, it's more, it's more creative expression and it's outward. So, and more sharing. So it is also worth noting that this is happening at 0 degrees of Leo. It's the threshold of a new sign, the rawest and least modulated expression of this new chapter, 0 degrees. Whatever this transit is bringing in my own chart and in yours, and where we look at planets or points in the early degrees of Leo, is only just beginning to make itself known as well. So holding that together, we've had a single day, which was 4 days ago. So we've had a single day. We had the full moon in Capricorn asking us to look honestly at the structures of our lives. Jupiter crossing into Leo only 5 hours later, asking that whatever has been illuminated find its way toward authentic, courageous expression. And Mercury stationing retrograde that same afternoon, asking that we do not rush that expression, but let it settle, deepen, and find its true words before it is spoken. And the sequence itself tells a story: illumination, expansion, and then the patient inward turns that ensures that we eventually express, whatever we're going to eventually express is genuinely ours rather than just something simply reactive. So I've done really well this week because there's for the last week there's something going on in my own life where I could have been reactive like nearly every day about a particular really silly thing that I'm being held to, that really is really meaningless and really pointless. But what we have when we're interacting with people, sometimes they can want to manipulate situations so that we have to play the game. And the game, part of the game is, which is unspoken, is that one reacts and defends themselves. So then the other person becomes, they win. Because the minute we have to start defending our boundary or ourself, and when we're living out our authentic self, if I'm living out my authentic self or you're living out your authentic self and you have to start defending that, we don't have to defend that. We just go, I'm done with this or such like. You can think about that in your own life. But with Mercury retrograde in Cancer, it is emotional. So I think that I take the view on retrogrades that it's rewind. I'm probably not saying it in order, but rewind, release, relax, review. I always remember that. I remember it years ago from an astrologer, and it sounds really good idea to me. That's Mercury retrograde. Mercury retrograde doesn't bother me. I'm ruled by my Gemini sun and Gemini moon is in the seventh house, and it's ruled by Mercury. So I'm quite happy to go over old material and I feel easy about that. So asking that this isn't about rushing expression, but let it settle, deepen, and find its true words before it is spoken. So the sequence itself tells a story, this wonderful story, and that's being mirrored, and we are mirroring out there. So we don't want to just simply be reactive, and becoming unreactive in a way is part of. So there are things we need to react to very quickly, particularly Uranian situations, which is interesting because Mars, if we go here, this is good before I go further. Mars, it's the 3rd of July, you can see that Mars is 3 degrees there. Let's do the hours because we got the 4th of July in the USA. So the Pluto return, oh, sorry, the 4th of July, not the Pluto return, the 4th of July, and then this going on as well. So let's see the moment that this went. 4th of July, 2:44. Mars is gonna go over. Look, there's Mars, the red one. There's Uranus. I'm just waiting to see when there it is. So that would have been at 7:44 a.m. roughly, UK British summertime. So just before midnight in California, if that helps. And it's in Gemini as well. So Jupiter is inviting in generosity, good one, creative courage. So have courage in the things you want to do. I had some courage. I ordered online I've got some artwork and I'm showing a piece of my art to a NHS clinic. I work in a trauma clinic in London, which is very well known for trauma. It was one of the first clinics that was set up with a gentleman called, let me just see here, Hugh Christian Miller. He worked along with, there was Freud was involved and Carl Jung, and it's called the Tavistock Clinic in London. And there has been some controversy around that clinic, but the early days also were very, very important for psychoanalysis and psychology and all of these wonderful things, talk therapy. And Hugh Christian Miller wrote a book that I think it was 1912, which I'm reading at the moment, called Hypnotism and Disease. So he's talking about, this thing that we wonderful thing that we can use, hypnotism, which a lot of people do not understand. They think you can just be made to do things, and this is not true. This is theatrics, hypnotism to relax and get into a really relaxed state, and we can help ourselves to change states and to become more relaxed and to move towards things we want to move towards. Very useful tool. There are many tools we can use in this world to do what we think is right for us. We all each go our own path, but I'm qualified in clinical hypnosis. So that's a good thing I did in 2023 that I did for myself to help people. And this is a moment, what is beginning and this is a light moment. This is a wonderful moment. So now I'm going to read some notes on Jupiter that I got from two books I have. One is called Planets in Transit by Robert Hand. And it's a great book. I think it's still in print on Amazon or one of those people, you can get it, one of these companies, World Books or something. And then the other one that's brilliant is Planets in Aspect by Robert Pelletier. I may be spelling or saying that differently than it's spelt, but that's how I see it. So Jupiter, the great benefic and the feeling of this transit. The old astrologers believed Jupiter produced nothing but good. This is what the old astrologers believed. So we're told. And there's real truth in that. Life tends to flow more easily under a Jupiter transit. And what you set out to do tends to succeed roughly as intended. At its most fundamental level, Jupiter is the self reaching out to include more and more of the world within itself. It's a planet of growth and enlargement, and sometimes literally, I did notice this, when it's gone through my first house, we, for some of us, we put on a bit of weight at certain times and then we lose a bit. So we're all different, but there can be weight gain because there can be excess. We change our eating patterns or our eating habits. And that's just a trivial example, and it's nothing to take too seriously. But it's just something like I noticed that when Saturn was moving through my first house, all my joints, this was a different transit, but all of my joints felt completely sort of achy. I felt the whole of the structure, so Saturn is to do with bones, it's to do with teeth, it's to do with the structure of our body as well. So different times we go through different things. And also I lost a lot of weight when Jupiter was in my, not Jupiter, Saturn was on my ascendant too much, So we experience different things that can cause weight gain or weight loss as well, naturally, because of whatever's going on in our lives. And then the next thing on social and legal dimension, on the social and legal dimension, Jupiter governs the social glue that holds a culture together, and which is why it rules the law. So it's to do with law, the legal system, and those in power and government, a function it shares with the sun. Under difficult Jupiter transit, this can show up as legal trouble under and easier ones as legal power or advantage conferred. These are nothing to worry about. We've also always look at our transit. This is more to do with the mythology and the understanding and the looking at our own lives and seeing how we can look after ourselves. So on the house Jupiter transit, so wherever Jupiter is moving through your chart, shows where you are trying to grow. So at the moment, I am in the eighth house and I'm doing this, I'm digging deep into my history as well, into my past, where you're trying to grow and how. And that growth might be, it might be wise, an expansive kind sort of thing, or it might tip into excess, into reaching more, for a territory than the territory can hold. So don't take what that house rules at face value and watch for overdoing it or taking more than your share. And we know when we take more than our share. And we know when we're not being met equally as well, and people are not sharing equally with us. So this isn't just one way. We just need to keep our eyes, and be aware. Am I being valued? I'm valuing this person's creativity and these. Am I being valued back equally? Equally, it doesn't have to be exactly equal, but I'm sure you get the idea. So on planets that Jupiter aspects naturally during a transit, these represent parts of the personality that are working smoothly and reaching their aims with the same caution about excess applying. So if we look at this and we just understand that it is also about excess and going overboard, but it's also about there's the good side to it, and then we've got the harder angles that are simply the moments to watch for excess most closely. That would be good. And Jupiter in high expectation that the future will reward one's best hopes. So if we just think, I don't have to do anything, my rewards, I'm just going to be rewarded. And then we have the higher mental faculty that searches for meaning beyond the literal facts of a situation, which is Jupiter. It's spirituality. It's also that higher, there's a higher mind going on in there with the law as well, and it rules the ninth house in astrology, Sagittarius. So it assigns spiritual value to growth itself and draws the line between right and wrong. And it's the wish to trade the harshness of mere survival for something something else, something feeling idealism and enthusiasm for life and joy, and it feeds philosophy, it's education, and a sense of propriety in how we behave socially. So many of us do know how to be kind and to behave in a social way. Some of us, sometimes we're going through a hard day and we can't contain it all. Sometimes we need our alone time too. So we can't be going around being in one state all the time. But we do know how to be generally when we think about it through wisdom. And the shadow side, which is, the Jungian, this is not Jungian, I'm saying, but it is Jung talked about the shadow. It's where aspirations increase, but so does the tendency to take on more than one can actually, handle. So we have to watch, can I handle this? You're taking on too much work or too much responsibility or too much educational study. It can be great to say, I'm going to get all of this done within a year. It could be writing, it could be anything that we're doing that, that if we're just expecting a reward without contribution, also the impulse, and also gambling, it's like, just watch yourself. I know with my Jupiter square to the transit Neptune at the moment, I know I have to be mindful and just keep grounded. I'm aware of that with the square. So these ideas of, just schemes that where you can earn money without doing anything. I mean, this is just not, great. If you find out what you can do, let me know. Um, So, Robert Hand, there was some source material that I came up with, but I think I've covered everything. And that's it. And I'm going to leave it there. And I'll come back with the moon video on this upcoming Thursday. Have a lovely rest of the weekend.